Hi, Allison. You are part of the African Refugee Development Center, and we would like to know what is it all about.
We are a grassroots community-based organization made up of Israelis and African asylum seekers. We were founded in 2004 by an Ethiopian asylum seeker who was seeking refuge within Israel. We've been growing with community needs over the past 10 years, 14 years now. We started basically as an aid organization trying to provide shelter for the community as they came in. And as community needs evolved, we evolved with them. So currently we focus on a few main projects, access to higher education within Israel or online. We also do community outreach and rights empowerment, going into the community, speaking about the refugee status determination process, family reunification, and helping and assisting people in understanding their rights within Israel. We also have a vocational skills program in which we assist African asylum seekers in accessing trainings, certified trainings within Israel that then assist later in job placement, hopefully. That's the goal. This is a very new project, so we're working on that. And finally, we do a lot of advocacy work, trying to outreach to the Israeli community, trying very hard to make it a friendly dialogue, a dialogue in which Israelis don't feel marginalized or attacked, but that we can really approach Israelis and affect change in accepting the African asylum-seeking population.
When did you start this organization? How old is this organization?
The organization was founded in 2004, so about 14 years now.
Today, it's all on the news. They say we will accept half of the asylum seeker. I don't know if you saw it. If half leave. So what do you think about it?
We're currently facing a bit of a crisis with the governmental policies that seek to deport. We've had some developments in the past few weeks. There's been a halted procedure while the Supreme Court tries to dig in to understand more about these agreements with third countries. Essentially, this is a crisis. The government sees many of the asylum seekers as migrants, as migrant workers, partially due to the fact that only approximately 15,000 of the 38,000 have applied for asylum. The problem with this is there are approximately 38,000 right now. So 15% of those would be women, the rest men. And then I would say 79 to 80% from Eritrea, an additional 12 to 15% from Sudan, and 5% maybe from other African countries, some from Ethiopia as well. And this is not to be confused with the Ethiopian Jewish population that is residing in Israel currently. Most of these asylum seekers are fleeing persecution, ethnic cleansing in Darfur or the Nuba Mountains in Sudan. And in Eritrea, which is considered the North Korea of Africa, they're fleeing really terrible conditions and forced conscription into the military with indefinite service. So no end in sight. Oftentimes there are gross human rights abuses within the military service. There are cases of sexual slavery, torture. More often than not, the kind of work being done within the military is really just to benefit the generals or those in power, so building homes or estates that benefit these people. As I was saying, though, the issue with the asylum process, with 15,000 having applied for asylum, it still leaves a large number of people who haven't applied. And the government stance is if you haven't applied, then you're not an actual asylum seeker. But what we're seeing is an issue with the process itself. Currently, there's only one office open to accept applications for RSD to submit your application. That office exists in Tel Aviv, and half of the community lives in the periphery. So by doing this, you're asking people to take an entire day off work, to travel to Tel Aviv, to wait in lines for hours and hours on end, and maybe not get accepted to submit your RSD on that day, which means if you're not accepted, you have to do it all over again. So the system is very unfriendly in even accepting the application.
What is your background? Why did you start with this organization?
I was actually in my master's degree at Hebrew University, and I was about 8.5 months pregnant. I myself didn't have a status in the country at the time. I was going through the legal process of being naturalized through my husband, who is Israeli. And in that degree, we did a 2-day research project within South Tel Aviv. So I was working in one of the pirate kindergartens. If you don't know about these kindergartens, they're 40, sometimes 40 children in one daycare with maybe 2 caregivers. These kids are in there for very, very long hours because their parents work very long hours, sometimes I think 6 to maybe 8 to 10 at night. And without adequate care, these daycares are open facilities to keep children alive, but they are not there they cannot maintain the numbers and provide adequate care. So I was volunteering in one of these daycares for 2 days and realized the immense amount of difficulty that comes with being statusless in a country. It's not only access to employment, but it's so many other aspects that trickle down when it comes to childcare or even maternal health care. These are all very large issues. So this really hit home. Obviously, when you yourself are pregnant, it's really hard to see children in these conditions.
It sounds so unfair. What do you think is going to happen on the long run? Because from one side, the Israeli government has the right not to receive these people. But from the other side, being ourselves Jews, like refugees for so long, and having felt the persecution and the pain of being a stranger, we should be like more receptive, like more sensible to the needs of these refugees. What is your opinion?
I think the issue is really a question of what the state of Israel can do right now. You've mentioned that the state has the option of not accepting the asylum seekers, and yet they have. They allowed the asylum seekers into the country. There are no more coming. The border with Egypt is sealed. All of these people, or most of them, came through Sinai to Israel. I think at the height, maybe there were 60,000, and now only 38,000. So many have left. It's really more a question of why are these claims not being looked into? Right now, there are only 8 people who have actually achieved asylum, who have sought asylum. Their claims have been looked at and granted asylum within Israel. So 8 out of 60,000 total, it's a very small number. And what we notice is that most people go years upon years after submitting their RSD with no answer from the government. So the claims are not being reviewed. And I think the argument is, listen, if someone comes to Israel as a migrant worker and the country decides to deport, that is the country's obligation to uphold their own policies. But you must open the claims, you must review the claims and make that decision. You cannot leave 38,000 people statusless, without rights, without access to essential services such as health, and expect there to not be an issue. So the question really is, what can we do as Israelis, what can the Jewish community do to pressure Israel to open these claims, to address them, and to decide how to move forward, I think.
But there have been some cases of rape, and well, this is what we hear in the news, and crime in this community. Is it a small problem? Is it a big problem? What do you think?
I think these are the types of stories that are most prevalent, that people hear, the negative side, when a major crisis happens, when you see refugees or asylum seekers. When asylum seekers started coming to Israel, they were bused to South Tel Aviv and left to fend for themselves, dropped off and left. So the largest congregation of asylum seekers exists in South Tel Aviv, which was already a neighborhood lacking services, lacking attention and care from the government. This is not, the easiest place to live. I think when you do hear these stories, you also have to look at the root of the issue. If you have a group of people with no opportunity to live, really, to expand professionally, to develop, when employment is unstable, when their own lives within a country are unstable, and many of these asylum seekers have experienced trauma that goes unaddressed because of lack of health services that are affordable for people. You're not dealing with the root of the issue. You're looking for, Band-Aid solutions, and it helps at times. I think it becomes a good policy to scapegoat people, to say, oh, look, here are a few cases of crime. This is an image of the larger population, and I think that's very unfair. What we see with our clients and with the population in general, these are tax-paying. They pay taxes within Israel, tax-paying people who are benefiting society. If African asylum seekers are deported, many, the labor market in Israel collapses to an extent. Many of these people work in jobs that Israelis themselves don't want. And on top of that, I would say many people have a skill set that could benefit Israeli society. We have clients of ours who are child psychologists or environmental, graduated with a degree in environmental studies. So to look at a group of people and see only one thing, it's really unfair, unjust, and not representative of an entire population of people.
I am sure that in this time that you have been working there, you have seen a lot of cases. I think there must be heartbreaking cases. Which one did impact you the most?
For me personally, I think anytime you see a struggling mother, women in the African asylum seeking population within Israel are a very small percentage. Many of their husbands have been deported or voluntarily returned. So they're left in Israel with, 2 kids that they must support. They must find stable work to help care for these kids. Daycare is expensive. Their options are limited. Oftentimes we see women who are unable to provide for their children. They're relying entirely on organizational aid. At times, right now, there are organizations specifically designated to donations for women like this. And there's not so much hope. Many of these women themselves are survivors of some trauma or another, either torture or human trafficking. They have issues that should be cared for and dealt with themselves, and that makes work also very unstable. This is really hard, very, very hard to witness. Being a mother myself, it really hits home.
What do you do for them?
Our ARDC, the African Refugee Development Center, works mostly with access to education, vocational trainings, legal rights and also advocacy. So for cases like this, for dire cases for women in need, we work very closely with our partner organizations to try and connect the dots. Where we can't fill in, we send someone somewhere else where they can find that assistance. So unfortunately for us, we don't have so much support in that instance, but in all of the instances I just mentioned, in education and job placement, we do assist.
The same way that you have seen duress against these people, have you seen kindness in some part of the society?
I think now more than ever, yes. With the news of the deportations, we're seeing massive amounts of people coming out and in support of stopping these deportations. So it is not all negative. We've had protests over the last month, demonstrations over the last month and a half. February 24th, we had 20,000 people in South Tel Aviv come out to protest against deportations. We had one last week. I didn't get the final head count. I think around 25,000 came out. So very large numbers of people coming out in support of African asylum seekers. But we've also seen a lot of professions, pilots saying, no, we will not fly asylum seekers to third countries. It's against our Jewish values. We've seen a number of professions like this saying, no, we as doctors refuse to go along with this. So it has been a really wonderful outcry of support. But what we're concerned with as organizations is when this news of the deportations dies down, where does the public support go? Because the issues are not solved, right? Maybe the deportations are halted, maybe they don't happen, but we still have the same population of people without rights. So how do we move from just protesting or supporting and really make a difference? And that's what we are trying to address now.
If someone wants to help you, what can they do?
We always need support. As small grassroots organizations, we rely on funding. Oftentimes we see that funding is cut because the situation is dire, and many large foundations say we cannot continue to give money when we don't see how the situation will play out. But what that does is that leaves people again without hope, without services, without a quality of life. On top of that, speak out, spread the word, talk to the Jewish federations, find channels that you can pressure the Israeli government and say, we do not stand for deportation. This goes against our Jewish values. This is an issue that we as Jewish people, whether in Israel or the diaspora, can address and can really assist in. There are a multitude of avenues to do this through. There are petitions that you can sign. All of these things help in showing the government that there are many people who do not agree with these policies. Maybe there should be another way to address the current situation. Let's
suppose someone wants to give a donation. Where does he go? Is there a website?
Our website is www.ardc-israel.org, and you can donate through that page. Yeah, that's the best way, I think. We also, you can donate through Israel Gives or America Gives, or through the New Israel Fund as well. Just designate that it would go to ARDC.
What program are you currently working on?
As I mentioned, we have 4 main programs that we're currently developing or building upon. We have a very, very successful higher education program, which helps ease the access into higher education in Israel. Without documentation, this is a really problematic process. Also bringing education from African countries and understanding the relevance within Israel. We often have to do standardized testing to make sure people are up to the level within English or within Hebrew. And that involves, extra courses, GED. So we assist in that, both with teaching the program the GED program, but also in assisting and accessing those tests as well. Often we advocate to universities to accept people without documentation and explain why this is happening. That's our biggest program and possibly one of our proudest, as we are one of the first to really do this for African refugees in Israel. Our newest program that we're also very proud of is our vocational program, which offers skills trainings that are certified in Israel to the asylum-seeking population, with a component of assisting in matching with possible employment after that. And that's really what we're working on. There are some issues there as well, but we're hoping to smooth those issues out as best we can. We do advocacy work, as I mentioned, online, a lot of social media campaigns targeting the Israeli population in the hopes of creating more understanding and breaking down stereotypes. And also community outreach. Two of our community outreach manager is Sudanese, a Sudanese woman named Sumaya. She's really amazing. And her coordinator is an Eritrean man named Tesfu. So we have a wonderful connection with the community. We are grassroots, and that really helps us. And we are one of the only organizations that goes into the periphery and meets the community where they live and assists in understanding rights within Israel.
These asylum seekers, they want to stay in Israel?
If you ask most of the asylum seekers, they will tell you they wish to go home. Israel is a temporary solution to the tragedies they've experienced within their home countries. It's a place of refuge, at least that was their hopes. Interestingly enough, for some of the Sudanese, you will hear them say that in the crisis, in the ethnic cleansing in Darfur, many of them heard the Jewish voices loud and clear speaking about Tikkun Olam, and they felt, of all places, here is a place that will accept us and welcome us. But again, many people wish to return. They wish to rebuild their countries to be, home.
What kind of tragedies are we talking about? What's happening to these people in their countries?
In Darfur, there's genocide, ethnic cleansing. The Arabization of the country is attempting to reduce the African tribes, the native African tribes. The government, the Sudanese government, is essentially enacting genocide in order, ethnic cleansing, to rid the country of the African tribes. I've heard a lot of people say before, well, if you're seeking refuge, you go to the next safest country, so why not go to Egypt? Egypt is relatively stable, why not stay there? But especially in the case of the Sudanese, Egypt backs the Sudanese government. So many people went to Egypt, and when they felt it wasn't safe, felt they had to move on and came to Israel that way. In Eritrea, again, you're seeing really gross, egregious human rights abuses by the government, which is a dictatorship. There's no opposition party currently. There's no free press. Most of the journalists have been detained indefinitely, and so there's no opportunity to speak out against what's happening. There's no freedom whatsoever. So people end up leaving because that is the only way to see a future, to escape military conscription, to find freedom, and that is how they end up coming to Israel through Sinai.
Last week we saw an awful article in the Israeli press about the awful thing that happened to these refugees in Egypt. There was a lady who wrote about this, who spoke about this, and what do you think?
Many of the refugees have come, most of them have come through Sinai, either having been trafficked or having spent some time in torture camps. There are torture camps within Sinai. These are Bedouin torture camps within Sinai. So Bedouins, horrific, just terrible things happening here, unspeakable. We also see that as people approached the Israeli border, they were being shot at on the Egyptian side. So really, crossing that border into Israel was safety to some extent. And even then, apart from physical safety from harm, not much else has been extended at this point.